James, a black soldier freshly returned from deployment, pulled his weathered pickup truck into the gravel lot of Charlie's Tap Room, a small bar nestled off a quiet highway in North Carolina. The neon glow of beer signs flickered against the twilight, reflecting the establishment's modest charm. Charlie's was a familiar haunt for truckers, locals, and weary travelers looking for a cold drink and a brief respite from life's demands. Still wearing his camouflage uniform, James stepped through the creaky door, the scent of old wood and faint cigarette smoke greeting him. The sound of a jukebox humming a Johnny Cash classic mingled with the low murmur of conversation. Scanning the room, James noted the usual characters: regulars engrossed in a pool game, a group chuckling at the bar, and a few loners nursing their beers in quiet contemplation. Opting for a secluded corner table, James sank into the seat, seeking solitude while maintaining a clear view of the room. His uniform carried the marks of countless days of service, but his scuffed sneakers spoke of someone prioritizing comfort over convention. As he nursed a glass of water, his thoughts wandered to home, the embrace of his mother, the laughter of his niece, and the peaceful days ahead. A reprieve from the challenges of military life. The creak of the bar's door snapping open turned heads as a group of 6 older bikers entered Charlie's Tap Room. Their heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor, their laughter loud and brash, filling the previously calm space. Each man wore a leather jacket adorned with worn patches and insignias, marking them as veterans of a different sort, a tight-knit group with a penchant for taking up space and drawing attention. They clapped each other on the back as they made their way toward the bar, their camaraderie loud and unapologetic. James, seated in his corner with a glass of water, glanced at the newcomers briefly before returning to his thoughts. His focus remained on the soft tune from the jukebox and the warm memories of home he'd been savoring. But it wasn't long before one of the bikers took notice of him. The leader of the group, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard and a voice as gravelly as a dirt road, paused mid-laugh. His sharp eyes locked onto James, and his expression shifted. Muttering something to the others, he gestured toward James, and soon, the whole group was staring. Their raucous laughter quieted into murmurs, tinged with disdain, and the tension began to creep into the air. James remained calm, his posture relaxed, but he could feel the weight of their judgmental stares. It was a look he knew too well, one that questioned his place without ever asking who he truly was. The bar's atmosphere shifted as the group of bikers began moving toward James. Their leader, the burly man with a salt and pepper beard, led the way, his boots hitting the floor with deliberate weight. Conversations around the room quieted as patrons exchanged uneasy glances. James set down his glass, his calm demeanor masking the heightened awareness honed during years of military service. The leader stopped just short of James's table, towering over him with a smirk. "Nice uniform," he barked, his voice gruff and laced with mockery. "Where'd you get it? A Halloween store?" The other bikers chuckled, their laughter thick with ridicule. James looked up, his gaze steady and unflinching. "It's mine," he replied evenly, his tone calm but firm. "Yours?" the man shot back, his smirk widening. "Now that's funny. I've seen plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues. What are you playing at? Looking for sympathy? A free drink?" James's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not playing at anything. I don't need sympathy or free drinks," he said, his voice measured. "I'm just here to enjoy my evening." The leader leaned closer, his beer-soaked breath invading James's space. "You don't look like a soldier to me," he sneered. "Where's your boots? Your tags? Bet you don't even know how to salute properly." The bikers behind him added their taunts, their laughter growing louder. "We're a big team," cried the second jeer. "I thought you forgetting about our training," said the third. "Probably never even seen a battlefield," one jeered. Another chimed in, "Bet he doesn't even know what that is." James sat back slightly, his calm expression unwavering, though his eyes flicked between the men, silently assessing the situation. The tension in the room was thick now, the faint hum of the jukebox drowned out by the biker's mockery. James took a slow breath, his years of training teaching him to stay collected under pressure. "I don't need to prove anything to you," James said at last, his voice quiet but resolute. The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Walking in here like you belong. You don't belong," he spat, his voice growing harsher. James met his gaze without flinching. "I've served 3 tours overseas," he said, his tone steady but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I don't need your approval to belong anywhere." For a moment the bikers hesitated, their laughter stalling as the weight of James's words settled over them. But the leader scoffed, doubling down. "Yeah? Prove it. Show us your tags, otherwise you're nothing but a liar." James exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to escalate the confrontation. "I don't owe you proof," he replied, his calm voice cutting through the growing tension. "But if you think starting something here is a good idea, I'd suggest you think again." The tension in the bar reached a boiling point as Hank's patience finally snapped. His smirk twisted into a scowl, and he lunged forward, his hand reaching for James's collar in an attempt to intimidate him physically. The motion was clumsy, driven by anger and bravado rather than skill or precision, but it was enough to set everything in motion. James didn't flinch. Years of military training kicked in instinctively. With a swift and calculated movement, he sidestepped Hank's grab, catching the man's wrist mid-air. The entire motion seemed effortless, a fluid combination of speed and precision. Before Hank could react, James twisted the man's arm behind his back and used his weight to guide him forward, pressing him firmly against the edge of the table. The impact was sudden, the thud echoing through the now silent room. Hank let out a pained yelp, his earlier bravado evaporating in an instant. His face was flushed with both exertion and humiliation as he struggled against James's firm yet controlled grip. The bar erupted in gasps and murmurs. The bikers, who had moments earlier been laughing and jeering, froze in place, their wide-eyed stares fixed on their immobilized leader. None of them moved, their earlier confidence shattered by how quickly James had taken control of the situation. Around the room, patrons exchanged shocked glances, the casual chatter replaced by a stunned silence. James's voice cut through the quiet, calm and measured but carrying a tone of unmistakable authority. "I told you to think twice before starting something," he said, leaning in slightly, his grip firm but not excessive. "You don't know who you're messing with." Hank struggled weakly, his body pinned against the table, but James didn't budge. He maintained control without exerting unnecessary force, his years of discipline showing in every deliberate movement. The other bikers began to shuffle uncomfortably, their eyes darting between each other, unsure of what to do next. One of them took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in a half-hearted gesture of peace. "Hey man," he stammered, his voice shaky. "Let him go. He didn't mean anything by it." James's sharp gaze shifted to the man, his calm demeanor unshaken. "He came at me," James said, his voice steady and controlled. "You saw it. If you want him free, tell him to calm down first." The bartender, who had been silently watching the scene unfold with a hand hovering near the phone, finally broke the tension. "Maybe it's time for all of you to leave," he said, his voice firm, "before this gets any worse." The bikers hesitated, glancing between their leader and the soldier who had just outmatched him without breaking a sweat. The bikers, clearly shaken and humiliated by the encounter, quickly escalated the situation. One of them pulled out a phone, his hands trembling as he dialed 911. "Yeah, we've got a guy here impersonating a soldier," he said loudly, ensuring everyone in the bar could hear. "And he just assaulted my friend." His words were meant to reclaim control of the narrative, but the tension in the room only grew heavier. James stood quietly by his table, his posture relaxed, but his mind alert. He understood how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. Around him, murmurs rippled through the bar as patrons whispered to one another, some uneasy, others clearly impressed by how he had handled the altercation. yet no one stepped forward immediately to intervene. Moments later, the sound of sirens pierced the tense silence, and red and blue lights flashed against the bar's windows. 2 police officers entered. One a broad-shouldered man with mirrored sunglasses, the other a sharp-eyed woman with a calm yet commanding presence. "We got a call about an altercation," the male officer said, scanning the room. His tone was steady but firm. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Hank, still clutching his wrist and flushed with both anger and embarrassment, wasted no time. He pointed an accusing finger at James. "That guy assaulted me, and he's impersonating a soldier. Look at him, he doesn't even have proper boots on." The officer turned his gaze to James, who remained composed. "Is that true?" the officer asked neutrally. "No, sir," James replied, his voice calm. "These men confronted me because they didn't believe I'm a real soldier. When he tried to grab me, I defended myself." The female officer stepped forward, addressing the room. "Did anyone witness what happened?" she asked, her voice measured but firm. The bartender broke the silence, setting down the glass he'd been polishing. "I saw it. Hank went after him first. That soldier just reacted to defend himself. It wasn't an assault." Other patrons began nodding in agreement, murmuring their support. The officers turned back to James. "Do you have proof of your service?" the male officer asked. James gestured toward his duffel bag. "In there, you'll find my uniform, complete with my name and rank as well as my ID." The officers inspected the items, their professional demeanor softening slightly as they confirmed the authenticity. "You're clear," the male officer said. "Thank you for your cooperation." Hank sputtered indignantly, but the female officer cut him off sharply. "Enough. From what we've heard, you instigated this. You're lucky he's not pressing charges." The male officer turned to Hank, his stern gaze unyielding. "Here's how this is going to go," he began, his voice firm and authoritative. "We're filing a report about this incident. If you want to pursue your claims, you're welcome to do so, but you should know that false accusations are a serious matter and we don't take them lightly." Hank opened his mouth to protest, his face red with embarrassment and frustration, but no words came out. The weight of the officer's warning and the lack of support from the room seemed to hit him all at once. He glanced at his crew, searching for backup, but their expressions mirrored his defeat. They shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone, including him. "You're lucky he's not pressing charges," the female officer added, her sharp tone cutting through Hank's indignation. "From what we've gathered, you instigated this entire situation. If you don't leave now, things will only get worse for you." The finality in her voice left no room for argument. Hank, still nursing his bruised pride and the lingering pain in his arm, muttered under his breath, but ultimately backed down. He cast one last glare at James, who stood quietly by his table, calm and composed. The rest of the bikers followed Hank's lead, shuffling toward the exit with their heads down. Their earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by awkward silence and a palpable sense of humiliation. The officers watched the group leave, ensuring they made it out without causing any further trouble. Once the doors swung shut behind them, the room seemed to exhale collectively. The tension that had gripped the bar for what felt like an eternity began to dissipate, replaced by the hum of quiet murmurs and a renewed sense of normalcy. The male officer turned to James, his tone softening. "Thank you for keeping your cool throughout this," he said. "We'll make sure this incident is documented properly." The female officer added, "You handled yourself well. Not everyone could have stayed as composed as you did." James gave them a small nod, his expression steady but appreciative. "Thank you, officers." With that, the officers exited the bar, leaving James standing at his table, untouched glass of water in front of him. The other patrons began to settle back into their routines, but many cast James respectful glances, their earlier wariness replaced by quiet admiration. Though the incident had been tense and unpleasant, James's calm strength had left a lasting impression on everyone present. A few days after the incident at the bar, James was in his driveway working on his old pickup truck. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as he tightened a bolt under the hood. Though the confrontation had ended without further escalation, the memory lingered. It wasn't the first time James had faced unfair judgment, and he doubted it would be the last. Still, he carried himself with the same quiet resilience that had seen him through countless challenges. The sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. Straightening up, James wiped his hands on a rag and turned to see a motorcycle rolling into his driveway. The rider, a wiry man in an oversized leather jacket, stepped off the bike and removed his helmet. James recognized him instantly. It was Bill, one of Hank's crew from the bar. For a moment, Bill hesitated, shifting awkwardly before walking toward James. His posture was cautious, his expression uneasy. "James, right?" he said, his voice quieter than expected. James nodded but remained silent, waiting to see where this was going. Bill stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. I wanted to come by and say I'm sorry," he began, his tone genuine but uncertain. "What happened at the bar that wasn't right? I didn't stop it, and I should have. I went along with Hank, but seeing the way you handled yourself, it made me realize how wrong we were." James studied Bill for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Why now?" he asked evenly. Bill looked up, his face flushing with guilt. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said earnestly, "and because I don't want to add to the hate I've seen in my life. I've been thinking about it since that night. You didn't deserve any of it." For a long moment, James said nothing, his gaze steady. Finally, he sighed, leaning against the truck. "It doesn't erase what happened," he said, his tone measured, "but it's a start." Relief washed over Bill's face. "Thanks, man. I mean it." As Bill mounted his bike and rode away, James watched him go, feeling a mix of emotions. The apology didn't undo the harm, but it was a step toward understanding a small victory in the ongoing battle against prejudice. As James watched Bill ride away, a mix of emotions settled over him. The apology, while unexpected, resonated deeply. James understood the effort it took for someone like Bill to confront not only their actions, but also their ingrained prejudices. It wasn't easy to admit fault, let alone seek out the person wronged to make amends. While the apology didn't erase the hurtful incident, it represented something. James valued progress, however small. Leaning against his truck, James reflected on the past few days. The encounter at the bar had been an unpleasant reminder of the biases he still faced, even as a soldier who had dedicated years to serving his country. But Bill's visit, his sincere effort to make things right, was a glimmer of hope. It showed James that change, however slow and rare, was possible when people were willing to acknowledge their mistakes. For James, the lesson was clear. The fight against ignorance wasn't just about grand gestures or public battles. It was about the quiet, persistent resolve to stand firm in the face of adversity and lead by example. Every action, every choice to respond with dignity and strength could plant a seed of understanding. And for James, those small victories mattered just as much as the larger ones.